Okay, here we go. It's kinesiology 231. This is the second half of our body composition presentation, and this is specifically starting off with body mass index. Now, BMI index started off as the Quintilet formula, and it was a formula used to come up with norms for individuals. And there's a wonderful article, make sure I get it correctly here. It's the unethical use of BMI. You can pretty much Google that, and I think it'll come up. And it talks about how BMI started, and it started off with a particular group in a particular region, Belgium, I believe, and it was befitting of that population, but it really isn't befitting of others from other areas of the world. And it also has its limitations in terms of how it classifies people incorrectly, but it's still a tool that we use, and it's still a tool that insurance companies use as well, so we have to give light to it. So the formula itself is mass in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. And now for my example, and I'll do a video on this real quick. I just did a real quick math on mine. I did my height and weight. My height is 5'10", 5'10" and a little bit of change. It comes out to 179 centimeters. And my weight is 185, and that comes out to 84.82 kilograms. So if I do the math on this, I have 84.82, sorry to look off screen here, but I gotta make sure my notes correct. 84.82 kilograms, and then that's divided by 1.79, which would be the meters squared. So it really comes down to 84.82 divided by 3.2041. My BMI is 26.47. Now in the book, table 11.4 on page 246, you have an entire set of data points within this area of the chapter, but specifically table 11.4 speaks to BMI. And so, my friends, your instructor is classified as overweight based on BMI. Okay. So, with that stated, we look at body mass index, and we take this on a scale here, and we look at this and go, okay, if we look at this in pounds, I'm saying I'm closer to 190, I'm closer to 5'11-ish, right in here, I'm a 27. Okay, so I'm overweight, whatever. I work out several times a week, pretty good cardiovascular fitness, lift weights, etc. I'm not obese, so this table has its challenges associated with it. And we often look at this in terms of how we can guide people and help people. And many times when you're sitting down with somebody across the table from you, their body mass index is going to be off the charts, just for a simple fact that they're coming to you in the first place to make a change in their lives. So this should not be a surprise to you when you see a number of people who are in the overweight or obese categories. That's just part of what we do in the fitness industry, is work with people to kind of pull them back on that table, and also help them in other areas of their wellness. Now, the issue you have is when you start talking about BMI and start talking about this in terms of a tool, there are correlations and you can't get around them. And you can't get around with when you're above a certain numeric value that it has an increase in a number of different comorbidities. And it's a tool that's used so often, and I think is a tool that's misused so often because it's only part of the picture. You're not talking about the actual two-compartment model like we talked about before. And this is a wonderful example. And I love this, and I talk a lot about, if you look at an American footballer who they're going to be doing a draft here pretty soon, and they went through the combine, I can guarantee you that the majority of those athletes probably have a high BMI, just because they are so built and they have such a high degree of muscle weight that their weight to height body weight ratio, it puts their body or puts their BMI off the charts. But if you look at this, this person would be classified as obese, though they're at 5% fat, which is still not the healthiest of things, but still BMI would show that they're obese. And it would show very much the same as a 5'11", 180 centimeter height man, who has a weight of 220, much like his bodybuilding counterpart. So you have to look at this and kind of say, all right, does it have validity? It does if you view it as part of a much bigger picture. It's not the picture, it's part of it. Now, I'm going to kind of go ahead and just zip through this, but if you look at this in terms of risk of morbidity, in terms of comorbidities, as well as just mortality in general, when individuals have a higher BMI, you're going to have a higher risk or incidence of comorbidities. We know this as part of the deal with BMI. And some statistical facts, it's kind of dated now, but like from 85 where you have high BMIs, and I'm willing to bet this does not look the same. I'm willing to bet this has actually changed a bunch. If we take this a step further and we come on down here to circumference and girth measurements, it's another tool, it's another way to evaluate progress, and it also has its challenges. You have individuals where as you're measuring a person's thigh, they might have very strong thighs from riding their bike all the time, but they might still be a little bit obese in their abdomen. And there's a higher correlation between abdominal fat than there is thigh fat, or more accurately in our example, between abdominal fat and thigh muscle. So again, you have to kind of take circumferences with a little bit of a grain of salt and just say, all right, we can use things like waist to hip ratio and waist circumference in terms of how fat's distributed, whether a person is apple shape or pear shape, right? Because there are those two main categorizations that we often hear about in our industry. But in terms of taking a look at like measure my biceps, measure my quads, measure my calves, if those are the types of evaluations you want to use with your clients, feel free to do so. I'm not telling you not to. Girth measurements are part of what we do, and you'll see this later on in our course in this module. So let's take a look at this, right? If you look at body fat distribution or adipose distribution, you look at how it's correlated with different morbidity factors, right? You have excess trunk fat if we measure around the abdominal area, and you have a higher incidence of fat in the midsection, and it becomes visceral fat. We know that there's a correlation between that type of excess fat and hypertension, type 2 diabetes, higher cholesterol, coronary artery disease, and premature death. So when you look at a person and evaluate them, where the fat is many times is also a key to where they are in their health history. Now, if we look at measurements and we look at the typical pear-shaped versus apple-shaped body types, and you kind of look at this and go, okay, with an apple-shaped person, they have this barrel area in the midsection of the body, whereas a pear-shaped person kind of tapers down and then has wider hips. That also has its place in terms of determining if the adipose tissue is in the abdominal area, meaning an apple-shaped person, or if it's pear-shaped and it's not in that visceral fat area. So we go ahead and do our measurements. And if we look at waist circumference and we look at this and go, okay, you're at 40 inches or greater. You have a waist to hip measurement of 0.95 or greater for men. You're at a higher risk, and same thing for women. So you can use just these two measurements to get kind of a quick and dirty evaluation of your client. But I will also tell you that if your client is sitting across the table from you, they have come in probably because they know this, either because they intuitively know this, or they know this because they went to their doctor and their doctor said, you've put on some weight, you need to do something about it. You can see you've gained in your waist circumference, and you're going to have to fix this problem, or you're going to have bigger problems down the road. And it becomes a fundamental part of the conversation when you're sitting with a person across from a table, that nobody just shows up and says, I want to be fit. They usually show up because they're running away from that kind of comment from their doctor and they want to get themselves in shape so they're healthier, or they're running towards like a wedding or beach vacation or something of the like. So when we get into these types of assessments and you're working with your clients, if you start doing body composition as well as anthropometric measurements, and you start to evaluate waist circumference, hip to waist ratio, etc., believe me, your clients will probably already know this, and they'll already be sitting in an office across a table from you, having a meeting as a trainer, because they're there to make that change. So it's a tool, it's a useful tool, but again, much like our BMI, it's not the tool and it's not the exclusive thing you use to evaluate your people. With limb girth, usually, people go through such a change in terms of their workouts. They'll have like subcutaneous fat, you start putting on muscle, they burn off subcutaneous fat, they put on more muscle, and they have this almost like net change in terms of girth. Where you normally see girth measurements change is in the waist, in the kind of like the midsection by the abdomen, the glutes, sometimes the thighs, but where you might see it like in men, if they start throwing around a bunch of weight and they want to get huge, they might get a bigger chest. But the other part of this is when you measure across the chest, remember, it's not just under the armpits and you're going across the chest, you're going around the trunk itself. So if you're losing fat overall, keep in mind, it's never ever spot reduction. We just don't, it doesn't happen. And the good mnemonic or the best mnemonic to remember is first on, last off. So as you're taking your clients through a workout, the first weight that was ever put on as stored fat is going to be the last weight to come off. So as they go through workouts and you're helping them burn off some of their stored calories, if you will, you might find that they're going to lose some girth up in the arms, even though you're putting on a little bit of muscle. And then as they go through their workouts, they lose a little bit more weight, they get a little bit thinner, they start putting on some muscle, and the muscle itself is burning the calories, etc. It becomes a virtuous cycle. As a result, many times your clients will come to you with frustration points that they're not seeing the results here, but they're seeing the results here, or they're seeing the results here, but they're not seeing it here. And that's just simply because of how our bodies store fat. And it's a first on, last off, and I can't stress that enough, type of mindset you have to have with your clients. And I'm sorry to say that many times the last mile is the hardest mile, no doubt about it. So we'll end up doing a lab activity on this. We'll try to compare and contrast a few things. So you'll be able to do these, on your own and then submit them through Blackboard. Girth measurements are definitely part of it. We'll do BMI calculations, and you'll submit those. All right, guys, have a good one, and on to the next lecture.